"You don't belong here," Armand said, loud enough for the whole floor to hear. "This is a management track program, not a charity intake." Morel set her coffee down. She didn't flinch. She didn't look up. She just set her coffee down on the edge of her desk, carefully, the way someone does when they've learned that reacting fast costs more than it's worth. And she kept her eyes on her monitor. Armand Beausoleil was 31 years old, the youngest regional director in Belcourt Financial's Quebec City office, and he had never once in his life been told he didn't deserve something. You could see it in the way he walked, that loose, easy stride, the kind that comes from never having to brace for a fall. He had come over to her desk specifically. He'd walked past 4 other workstations to get to hers. That was the part that stuck with her later. Not the words, but the effort. The fact that he had chosen her. "The summer cohort is for people with relevant backgrounds," he continued, crossing his arms. "Finance degrees, business experience. Not," he paused, let his eyes drift down to her worn blazer, her clearance rack flats. "Whatever this is." Someone laughed. 2 desks over. Morel didn't turn to see who. "I have a meeting at 9, she said. "Excuse me? I have a meeting at 9, with the Tremblay file." She finally looked at him. "Unless you need me to reschedule something for you, I have to get ready." Armand stared at her for a moment the way people stare when they're deciding whether to escalate. Then he made a sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a scoff, and walked away. Morel turned back to her screen. Her hands were steady. That surprised her, even now. Even after 2 years of working in this building, in this department, under the particular fluorescent lights of the 14th floor of Belcourt Financial, she still half expected her hands to shake. They didn't. They never did anymore. She had come to Quebec City from Timmins when she was 22, with $400, a backpack, and a community college diploma in business administration that she had earned while working overnight shifts at a gas station off Highway 101. Her mother had signed the forms for her student loan because Morel's credit didn't exist yet. She'd never had a credit card, never had a lease in her own name, never had anything in her own name that wasn't a bus pass or a library card. The diploma had taken her 3 years instead of 2, because she'd had to drop a semester when her mother got sick. She'd driven back to Timmins twice that winter, split the medical bills with her Aunt Giselle, and come back to school in January with a D in accounting that she spent the rest of the program trying to undo. She got it up to a B+ by the end. When she arrived in Quebec City, she didn't know anyone. She rented a room in a house in Limoilou. 3 other tenants, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that smelled permanently of something boiled, and she started applying. 38 applications in the first month, 7 responses, 2 interviews, 0 offers. She took a temp position at a document processing center, scanning files for $8 above minimum wage. She stayed for 14 months. She learned the filing system so well that when the center lost a major client's tax records from 2019, Mireille was the one who found them, misfilled under an alternate spelling, buried in a subfolder no one had opened in 8 months. Her supervisor at the time, a woman named Hebert, had given the credit to someone else in the debrief meeting. Mireille had sat in the back and said nothing. She applied to Belcourt Financial 6 months later, entry-level administrative assistant, the lowest rung of their client services division. She got the job because she'd listed that recovery incident on her resume, quietly, in 2 lines, without naming Hebert or making it sound like a grievance, and the hiring manager had noticed. "You found a misfiled record in a system with 60,000 entries, the manager said during the interview. "I knew where to look," Morel said. "How?" "I'd read the whole system." The manager had paused. Why? Morel had thought about how to answer that. "Because no one else had," she said finally. She got the call the next day. That was 2 years ago. In those 2 years, she had learned the Belcourt client database, the same way she'd learned the document center's filing system. Completely, methodically, in the early mornings before anyone else arrived, and in the evenings after the floor had emptied. She knew which client portfolios were underperforming and why. She knew which advisors were double booking appointments. She knew that the Tremblay file, the one she'd mentioned to Armand that morning, had an error in its Q3 projection that would cost the client roughly $14,000 if no one caught it before the fiscal review. She had caught it. She had written it up in a memo and sent it to her direct supervisor, a man named Gatton, who was kind but overwhelmed, and who had forwarded it up the chain without quite understanding what he was forwarding. The memo had landed on the desk of Belcourt's senior portfolio analyst, a woman named Chantal Viau, who had read it twice and then asked Gaetan who had written it. Gaetan had told her. Chantal had said nothing else about it for 3 weeks. Then the summer management cohort had been announced. A 6-week accelerated program for employees being considered for fast-track promotion, and Mireille's name had appeared on the list. That was why Armand had come to her desk. He hadn't been told about the memo. He just knew that Mireille was from admin, that she had a community college diploma, that she wore the same blazer twice a week, that she took the bus. He knew what she looked like, and he had decided, with the absolute confidence of someone who has never been wrong about anything that mattered to him, that she didn't belong. The cohort orientation was on a Thursday afternoon in the third-floor boardroom with the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the St. Lawrence. There were 11 people in the program, Mireille counted. 9 of them had university degrees listed on their lanyards. Yes, the lanyards had degrees on them, which she had not been prepared for. 3 had MBAs. 2 had come from Laval, 1 from McGill, 1 from HEC Montreal. Mireille's lanyard said, Mireille Okonkwo, Client Services, Timmins Regional College. She watched Armand clock it from across the room. He said something to the man beside him. They both smiled. The program director, a senior vice president named Réjean Marcotte, opened the session by explaining that the cohort was competitive. Only 4 of the 11 participants would receive formal advancement recommendations at the end of 6 weeks. The rest would return to their current positions. This is not a prize, Réjean said. It's a test. We are looking for people who can think under pressure, communicate clearly, and find problems before they become crises. Mireille wrote that down, not because she needed to, because she wanted to have it in front of her. The first assignment was given out at the end of the session. A case study involving a fictional mid-sized investment portfolio with 3 embedded errors. Participants had 48 hours to identify the errors and submit a written analysis. On the way out of the boardroom, Armand fell into step beside Mireille. 3 errors, he said, not looking at her. Practically a gift. She said. I found all 3 in the first read-through. Good, she said. He stopped walking. She didn't. You know you're not going to make it through this, right? He called after her. No offense. It's just, this program is designed for a specific kind of professional, not administrative support. Mireille stopped. She turned around. She looked at Armand Beausoleil, his good suit, his confident posture, his absolute certainty, and she thought about the 14 months at the document center, about the D in accounting that she'd turned into a B+, about her mother's medical bills and the back seat of a Greyhound bus at 2 in the morning, and the filing system she'd memorized because no one else had bothered. The case study has 4 errors, she said, not 3. She walked to the elevator. She submitted her analysis at 11:15 that night, from her kitchen table, with a cup of reheated tea and the sound of her upstairs neighbor's television coming through the ceiling. The 4th error was subtle, a compounding miscalculation in the dividend reinvestment projections that only became visible when you cross-referenced the growth assumptions against the stated fee structure. It wouldn't have shown up in a standard review. You had to know what you were looking for, or you had to be the kind of person who checked everything twice because you'd learned early that mistakes didn't announce themselves. She submitted the analysis and went to sleep. At 7:40 the next morning, she had an email from Réjean Marcotte. Miss Okonkwo, you are the only participant who identified error 4. I'd like to speak with you before the next session. My office, 8:30. She read the email twice. Then she put on the blazer and took the bus. Réjean Marcotte's office was on the 16th floor, which Mireille had never visited. The carpet was different up here, thicker, quieter. The windows were larger. There were photographs on the wall of Réjean shaking hands with people whose names she recognized from financial news, from the business section of the Globe and Mail, from documents she'd cross-referenced at 2 in the morning on her kitchen table. He was already there when she arrived. He was older than he'd seemed in the boardroom, mid-50s, reading glasses, a coffee mug that said something in faded letters she couldn't quite make out. Sit down, he said. She sat. Walk me through how you found it, he said. So she did. She explained the cross-referencing, the fee structure discrepancy, the compounding effect across 3 quarters. She used the exact numbers. She didn't apologize for the length of the explanation or ask if he was following, she just explained it. When she finished, he took off his glasses, Who taught you to read a portfolio like that? He asked. No one, she said. I taught myself. Where? In the evenings. After work, I had access to the client database. You read the client database. I read the parts relevant to my work, and then the parts adjacent to that, and then the rest. He looked at her for a moment. Do you know what the Tremblay error would have cost us? He asked. 14,000 in the immediate term, she said. Potentially more if the client had filed a complaint with the AMF. Regulatory scrutiny costs more than money. He nodded slowly. Armand Beausoleil came to me yesterday evening, he said. He submitted a formal concern about your inclusion in the cohort. He cited your educational background and your administrative role as evidence that the selection criteria hadn't been applied consistently. Morel said nothing. He also mentioned that you made a claim about a fourth error in the case study, which he characterized as, I'm quoting, a bluff to appear more capable than she is. Mireille looked at him steadily. Did you read his analysis? She asked. I did. Did he find the fourth error? Regine put his glasses back on. He submitted an analysis identifying 3 errors. The room was quiet for a moment. I'm not going to rescind his participation, Regine said. That's not how this works. But I want you to understand something. He set down the mug. The memo you wrote about the Tremblay file. Chantal forwarded it to me 6 weeks ago, before the cohort was announced. I put your name on that list myself. Mireille looked at the window. The St. Lawrence was gray and flat and very wide. Okay, she said. That's all? He said. I have a lot of work to do in the next 6 weeks, she said. I'd like to get started. The remaining weeks of the program were not easy. She did not become friends with the other participants. She didn't have the energy for the kind of social navigation that required the careful calibration of being likable and impressive at the same time. She ate lunch at her desk most days. She answered questions in sessions clearly and without preamble. She asked the questions no one else was asking, the uncomfortable ones about risk exposure and client retention gaps and why certain fee structures existed the way they did. Armand stopped coming to her desk. He stopped making comments in the hallway. After the second week, he stopped looking at her entirely, which she understood. It's easier to dismiss someone you've decided doesn't exist than to watch them keep showing up. In week 4, there was a group exercise, a mock client crisis, a fictional portfolio in free fall, a room full of people talking loudly about solutions that address the symptom and not the cause. Morel waited until there was a pause in the noise. Then she said quietly what the actual problem was and how to fix it, and how long it would take and what it would cost. The room went quiet. Regine, observing from the back, wrote something down. In week 5, Chantal Viau came to one of the sessions. She sat beside Morel during the break and said, The Tremblay memo. Do you have others like it? A few, Morel said. Send them to me. She did. On the last day of the program, the 4 names were announced. Morel was first on the list. She heard Armand's name too. He was third. She had expected that. He was capable when he wasn't performing for an audience, and his background was genuinely strong. Being wrong about one thing, or one person, didn't make him incompetent. It just made him someone who'd never had to learn the difference between confidence and accuracy. After the session, in the elevator, he stood next to her. He didn't say anything for 2 floors. Then, the 4th error. In the case study. Yes, she said, I missed it. Yes. Another floor. How long did it take you to find it? She thought about it honestly. The first 3 took me about an hour, she said. The 4th took me 4 more hours. I almost didn't find it. He looked at her. She looked at the floor numbers. I've been in finance since I was 20, he said. My father was a portfolio manager. I interned at 17, I know, she said. And you still. I had more time to look, she said. I didn't have anywhere else to be. The elevator opened on 14. She stepped out. She didn't look back. 3 months later, Mireille Okonkwo was formally promoted to junior analyst, the first person in Belcourt Financial's Quebec City office to move from administrative support to the analyst track without an undergraduate degree. The announcement went out on a Friday afternoon in the same email chain where the summer cohort results had been shared. She read it on the bus home. She forwarded it to her mother. Her mother sent back a voice message that was mostly static and something that sounded like crying, and then the word bien repeated 3 times. Mireille listened to it twice on the bus, with her forehead against the cold window, watching the city go by. She wasn't sure what she felt exactly. Not triumph, not relief, quite. Something quieter than either. The particular feeling of arriving somewhere you work toward for so long that the arrival itself feels slightly unreal, like a word you've said so many times it stops sounding like a word. She thought about the gas station in Timmins, the overnight shifts, the diploma on the wall of her childhood bedroom. She thought about the D in accounting, and the 14 months in the document center, and Hebert not saying her name in that debrief meeting. She thought about $400 and a backpack and a room in Limoilou that smelled like boiled vegetables. She thought about Armand in the elevator. I didn't have anywhere else to be. It was true, and it was more complicated than it sounded, and she had meant it without bitterness. The long road had taught her to look more carefully. The absence of shortcuts had made her good at finding things other people missed. She hadn't chosen the difficult path, but she had learned something on it that couldn't be borrowed or inherited or fast-tracked. The bus stopped at her corner. She got off, walked up the street, and unlocked the door of her apartment. A different one now, her own name on the lease, one bathroom all to herself. A kitchen window that looked out at a maple tree. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table where she'd written the case study analysis, where she'd sent the Tremblay memo at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, where she'd read job listings and textbooks and client documents until her eyes ached. She opened her laptop. She had 3 new emails, one from Chantal, one from Réjean, one from a name she didn't recognize, someone at the Montreal office asking if she'd be willing to consult on a file that was giving them trouble. She started with the one from Chantal. There are people in every room who are underestimated before they speak, overlooked before they act, dismissed before they're given a chance. And there are people who do the dismissing, who've never once had to ask themselves what they would have become if they'd been handed less. The two rarely understand each other, but sometimes in the right room, with the right question and enough time and a fourth error no one else was looking for, the room shifts. And the people who are certain suddenly aren't. And the person who is quiet is the one at the table. Not because the world became fair, but because she stayed.